My name is Thomas Huddleston. I am Research Director at the Migration Policy Group and also Research Coordinator of the ReSOMA platform. ReSOMA, which is the research and social platform on migration and asylum. The goal of ReSOMA is to make sure that all of the evidence that's coming from research and civil society is actually heard in the EU policy debates. Right now we have a lot of decisions that are happening at the EU level. Policies on migration and asylum are changing really rapidly, and the time to make good decisions is also shrinking more and more. So there are a lot of big decisions that could have major impacts on the policies all across Europe. But for that, then actually researchers and NGOs need to focus and work together to make sure that their evidence is heard in these quick-moving policy debates. Researchers and civil society actually need to be planning together. How are they going to intervene in these policy debates and make sure that their evidence is heard? Evidence that comes from academic journals, but also evidence that comes from grassroots service providers on the ground. If we don't actually work together and start working much more quickly, then the evidence that we generate is not going to be heard by anyone and is just going to sit there on the shelf. So that's why with ReSOMA, we're really focused on networking our communities together, getting people registered on the ReSOMA expert database so that you have an opportunity to contribute to these fast-moving debates. ReSOMA brings together the top researchers and top EU NGOs to figure out what are the key decisions that are likely to happen this year that could have a major impact on migration and asylum policies all across Europe. And then we ask our expert database community if these are the issues that they're also seeing on the ground, and we start to ask them, well, what are the problems that you're seeing? What are the impacts that this has on immigrants and on local communities? And then we start to look at see how different municipalities, national governments, and EU institutions have tried to come up with solutions, policies that will address these problems. And there again, we also go out to our research and civil society experts to know what evidence they have about what policies are really most effective and not effective. And after we've identified those really effective policies, we start to listen to why the EU institutions in particular, but also national governments, haven't been implementing those policies. You know, what are the perceptions or misperceptions that they have? What are the trade-offs that they face? And again, we turn to our database of experts to ask them to help us to counter some of those myths and maybe come up with alternative paths for reaching that kind of reform and an effective policy. By being part of the expert database, you have the chance to actually become part of an integrated professional community on migration. ReSOMA partners include dozens of NGOs and researchers as members who can allow us to reach a huge group of people. But the problem is, when you're part of all these networks, you sometimes miss the key opportunity where your evidence or advice can have a major impact. That's why we created the expert database for ReSOMA, because we only write to that database when there's really a key question that you can use right now to influence the policy debate. For that reason, we are seeing more and more organizations that are discovering ReSOMA and are telling their own members to join the ReSOMA database. It's been growing slowly, but we already have hundreds of people on the database, and next year we hope to reach even more. The experts that are part of this database can really give evidence, but of course we also want that evidence to be heard by EU policymakers. But actually, ReSOMA's been able to reach out to a lot of the EU institutions because they need to make decisions. And so they have been really helpful for ReSOMA to figure out what decisions are most important, because all of us have expertise on many different issues, but there's not going to be any change in the next year on those issues. Instead, the policymakers help us to figure out what are those issues where actually an evidence from a wide range of the civil society could help to define what the problem is or find that relevant solution. So we see that policymakers are really helpful for us to figure out where decisions are about to happen. And then when ReSOMA starts providing evidence, they are actually really interested in using that evidence because it's going to help them make a better decision. We are finding dozens of criminalization cases that the European Commission was missing. We are actually seeing so many ways that local authorities and local NGOs could benefit from more direct funding on migration, but also the social inclusion of migrants that the European institutions want to see, because they've released so much money in response to the 2015 and 16 arrivals that they want to actually see being used on the ground. So when policymakers sit down with researchers and NGOs and tell them what honestly is on the agenda and off the agenda, then those organizations can work together to move forward those items and create a relationship of trust so that researchers and NGOs can also put other issues on policymakers' agenda that they are missing because they don't have that experience of the real trends and unmet needs on the ground.